Our obsession with the macabre knows no end. Every scant detail about serial killers has us hanging on to each word and listening to different yet similar accounts as we skip between true crime podcasts. And while the practice is losing momentum, at least here in the West, the idea of capital punishment has a similar hold on our psyches. And whether it's through legacy media interviews with condemned people, or even the gatherings on the day of the big event, we seem to be unable to sate our curiosity when it comes to every last detail of those final 24 hours. Much like the years-long tradition of having to choose a final meal. Especially now, as it is no longer an option for most death row inmates. More on that in a bit. But first, let's take a look at some of the more famous last meals that have been ordered up. Now, a small note, but we're not here to discuss individual cases. But if you'd like to see videos like that, let me know down below. So let's start out this list with what the original last meal used to be. You see, before they were taking orders from McDonald's in prison, condemned people were just treated to an extra special meal. Of course, these differed from region to region and prison to prison, but the sentiment was generally the same. A full meal of meat and sides with an extra special dessert like cake or pie to top it off. Now, for most of us, this might not sound like anything special, but historically, prison food isn't known for having any Michelin stars, and it's generally served for being big on nutrients, but not on taste. And the further back in time you go, I'm guessing you can imagine it wasn't much better.
The stage is set for the utmost tensity of drama as Hauptmann takes the witness stand. Questioned by his own lawyer, Riley, the Bronx carpenter in German accent begins his string of denials.
And this is the situation that Bruno Richard Hauptmann found himself in after being convicted of kidnapping and killing Charles Lindbergh's infant son in 1932. It was considered to be the crime of the century as it was about as big of a spectacle as it could be. Just imagine, a German man killing an all-American hero's child. It doesn't get any more sensational than that in the US in the 1930s. He ended up getting caught after using one of the marked bills to pay for gas, and in short order found himself under lock and key before long. Now, the whole case against him was pretty much circumstantial, but it was some pretty strong circumstance, especially considering the era.
Then that board from Hauptmann's house with Jassie's address.
What? That is not your handwriting?
Live a life of luxury and ease so he wouldn't have to work. He quit his job the day he collected the $50,000.
Anyhow, Hauptmann was convicted and sentenced to death, and back then, there was a super quick turnaround with these things. Within a year of his conviction, he was facing his final day in that final meal. And speaking of, it was some roasted chicken, cherries, french fries, buttered peas, olives, and celery. And that was followed up by a tasty slice of cake. While the option was there for a lot of inmates on death row, not all of them partook in the tradition. But as the years marched on, the last meal was becoming more and more standardized.
Tom, the latest information we have is that Bundy has now confessed to yet another murder, this one a Grand Junction, Colorado woman. But despite his continued willingness, prison officials say they are confident they'll go on with tomorrow's execution as planned. Shortly after 2:30 this afternoon, the state prison showed the first sign of what was to come. A diesel engine that will power tomorrow's scheduled electrocution was turned on and tested.
And Ted Bundy got to find this out on January 24th, 1989, when he answered for his part in the death of at least 20 young women across 7 separate states. He ended up confessing to 30 murders in total, and it's believed it might be as high as 36. For all that, in 1979 and 1980, over the course of 3 trials, he was handed 3 separate death sentences. Now, when his day finally came, he morosely declined choosing his final meal and was ordered the standard at the time in Florida. Medium rare steak, eggs over easy, hash browns, buttered toast, milk, juice, and coffee. Again, it might not seem like an overabundance of pizzazz, but again, as the years marched on, day-to-day prison food wasn't cherished among the inmates. Now, of course, being the disgusting human being Ted Bundy was, his last official horrible act was to let that food go to waste. He met the next world on an empty stomach. I mean, come on, breakfast for dinner's awesome, isn't it?
Terry, the horrible truth to suburban contractor John Gacy's rambling statements to police last week is becoming more and more evident with each passing day. 6 more bodies unearthed from the basement crawl space of Gacy's Norwood Park Township home today, bringing to 15 the number found there since Friday.
Now, of course, we couldn't have this list without mentioning the OG killer clown John Wayne Gacy, the man that is single-handedly responsible for clown phobias and probably the It franchise.
What a nice pony. Do you want it back?
Also, as a side note, when a dude dresses up as a clown and offers to show you a magic trick with handcuffs, just say no. Consider that my PSA for this episode. Now, he is best known for doing just that and murdering at least 33 young men and boys, with 26 of his victims getting buried under his house. Truly one of the most horrific people on this list for sure. Now, he got the one-way trip to the afterlife for that when he was convicted in 1980. And he got traveling orders 14 years later on May 9th, 1994. And for him, his final meal took him back to his roots as a manager of several KFC restaurants. Now, in case you're wondering, he fell into his dream job after marrying a woman whose dad was an owner of several franchises. So, of course, he wanted to taste a simpler time with his last meal, where he ordered a bucket of KFC, a dozen deep-fried shrimp, French fries, a pound of strawberries, and some Diet Coke. Now, considering everything, why the Diet Coke? I mean, live a little, am I right? Too soon? In the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was a trend that started to emerge. Condemned prisoners seemed to be having a competition to see who could order more food. Of course, this just ended up ruining it for everyone, but it wasn't one big meal that brought the whole system down. There were a couple that really brought this practice into question.
Well, from Mississippi this morning, a former butcher who was convicted of dismembering a man over a drug debt and a woman he locked in a metal box. He's scheduled to be executed today. The attorney of Gary Carl Simmons Jr. asked the state Supreme Court to stop today's execution based on mental evaluations. In a motion Tuesday, he said his client's previous lawyers never explored his mental issues.
And Gary Carl Simmons Jr. had one of those meals. His crimes, they were pretty horrific, and honestly, I don't really care to repeat them here, but let's just say he was a disgusting and vile human being. Feel free to look up his rap sheet yourself. His final meal, however, was something else. And I quote, 1 Pizza Hut medium super supreme deep dish pizza, double portion with mushrooms, onions, jalapeno peppers, and pepperoni. Another pizza, regular portion with 3 cheeses, olives, bell pepper, tomato, garlic, and Italian sausage. A 10-ounce pack of Parmesan cheese, 10-ounce packs of ranch dressing, 1 family-sized pack of Doritos, 8 ounces of jalapeno nacho cheese, 4 ounces of sliced jalapenos, 2 large strawberry shakes, 2 20-ounce cherry Cokes, 1 supersized order of McDonald's fries with extra ketchup and mayonnaise, and 2 pints of strawberry ice cream. In total, that meal, if eaten completely, was over 29,000 calories, almost 15 times the average caloric intake suggested. But of course, while there's no real answer to know how much of it was finished, we do know that it wasn't. But 90 minutes before the big show, according to officials during a press conference, he had finished about half. Suddenly, I'm very less hungry. Now, before we get into the last meal, there's a few bonus facts here. The concept of a last meal comes from, wait for it, ancient Greece, and eventually it spread to Rome. Now, this was the practice for anyone about to enter the Colosseum to meet their punishment.
Are you not entertained?
Basically a decent meal before you were torn to shreds, and it essentially continued on through time. Some believe the idea stems from the Last Supper, kind of a way to soften the blow, I guess. Next up, and this one's a little weird, but in Louisiana, it's customary for the warden to join the inmate for the last meal. According to some accounts, the warden will lead the meal with grace and try to keep the vibes as upbeat as possible. As for the most expensive last meal of all time, that goes to Robert Dale Conklin, who was put to death in 2005. His order included filet mignon wrapped in bacon, shrimp, a loaded baked potato, asparagus with hollandaise sauce, French bread, goat cheese, cantaloupe, and apple pie with ice cream. And even though he was a tiny little fella, dude cleared both plates and not a shred of food was left. By the way, there does need to be an asterisk beside this one because while it says the most expensive, I can't actually find the total cost of the meal anywhere. And for the final bonus fact, Since the prison population has basically exploded since the 2000s, restrictions have continued to mount on the system. Some regions have capped the final meal cost, like Florida, who now caps it at $40. Oklahoma caps it at $25. But other prisons have started limiting it to whatever the prison kitchen has in stock. So if some prisoners are looking for lobster, they may have to settle for something a bit more mundane. As for Texas, they dropped the whole idea, limiting the last meal to whatever was already on the menu. And all that is mostly due to our last meal.
It took the jury just 4 hours to find Lawrence Russell Brewer guilty.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment.
It was the verdict James Byrd Jr.'s family expected and welcomed.
So the man who is basically credited with ruining it for everyone in Texas is Lawrence Russell Brewer, arguably one of the most despicable people on this list. He was convicted in the death of James Byrd Jr. Brewer, a white supremacist, was one of the group that tied Byrd to the back of their truck and dragged him to death. Not only was he found guilty and sentenced to die, but he went on record in the end saying that he had no regrets and he would do it all over again. Literally the poster boy for dog shit. Of course, this waste of skin went out in the same way he lived. Are you ready for the order? It is as follows. A Pizza Hut meat lover's pizza, 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a cheese and ground beef omelet, a bowl of ketchup smothered fried okra, a pound of barbecued meat with a loaf of white bread on the side, 3 full orders of fajitas, a pint of vanilla bluebell ice cream, and a piece of peanut butter fudge cake. And to top it off, he asked for 3 root beers. And once he received it, he threw it in the trash and announced he wasn't hungry with a smile on his face. Now, of course, prison officials were rather upset at the stunt, and since there's been a strict refusal of all last meal requests in Texas. What a dick. Thanks for watching.